On and hello, it's nice to see you.
Hi, Sarah.
Oh, you're still muted. Yeah, there you go.
Hopefully I'm not.
Yeah, you're good now. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Great to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you. It was kind of fun when we were planning this. So we're using, as all the attendees and our panelists know, a software called Hey Summit. And it was my first time using it. And one thing I noticed is it's really set up for pre-recorded videos. Like it's super easy to use if you're doing that. It was a little bit more dynamic and things up in the air live. But it's been really, really fun. And so far, so good, right?
Yeah,
It's been
it was a great platform. Very cool to use.
well, good. I'm glad to hear that. Okay, so I think everyone is getting towards the end of their break. We have about 30 seconds left before we get started. So if you need to stand up and stretch your legs. How many hours are we in now? Let's see. This is our third hour.
Yep.
Top of our third hour, Adrian?
Yeah, it's been going well, actually. I'm surprised we've stayed on time. You and I both like to talk, so.
I know, right?
Right.
That's so cool.
Yeah, speak for yourself, man. Oh, no, just kidding. I think I'm gonna sleep all tomorrow. Like I'm gonna be done. Okay, so let's get started. We are at the top, so let me introduce our next speaker. Sara Dunn is a marketing geek and lover of all things WordPress, search engine optimization, and content. So after my own heart there. As founder and project lead at 11 Web, Sara has worked with over 130 clients on website design and marketing projects. In 2017, she niched down to offer SEO to the wedding industry at saradoesseo.com. And I've seen some new things that you're doing for the wedding industry lately, by the way, that isn't in your bio. That's pretty interesting. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Sara, and you can share your screen or whatever you want to next. You're in charge.
Great. Well, thank you so much for including me here. And what's really fun is that I have talked about niching down online for over 2 years now, and I've never done a presentation on it. So I'm excited today to kind of bring lots of things together and have some thoughts for the Liquid Web audience over the next 25 minutes or so. And I would love to answer any questions as I go if anyone wants to pop those in the chat. But I've got a little bit to share with you, and you should be able to see my screen now.
We sure can. Thank you, Sara.
All right, perfect. So I am super excited to talk about niching down today because I am kind of a geek of niching down, and I have become a specialized expert in something really small and really niche. I want to share a little bit more about how that happened over the last year and a half or so. It was not always this way. In fact, about 3 years ago, my agency was just a small team of 4, all working remote, and we were mostly working with local clients, small businesses who were local to me, like this local jeweler that you see on the screen here. We were doing website design mostly, but also any other marketing type projects that might come our way. I was dabbling here and there in social media and working with a designer for print design, doing Facebook ads. I was willing to take on anything that might put some money in the bank account and help someone out. This local jeweler that you see approached us looking for a website, and I was super excited about the project. I talked with them, I did a lot of discovery, and I put together what I thought was a great proposal, really detailed with what I wanted to do. I presented it to the jeweler, and he looked at it and got back to me, and he said, "This is great, but actually, my niece just took a web design class in college, so we're gonna have her take a stab at it first." And my heart just fell. After having made websites and done marketing for 3 or 4 years at the time, I had just lost a project to someone who took a 3-credit-hour class in college. And it was pretty crushing. That was when I knew that something was really wrong with the way that I was positioning our services and the way that I was talking about the work that we did. And I just want to ask everyone who's on this today, does this sound familiar to anyone? I have talked over the last couple of years to a lot of people that are just generalist marketing folks. And I think this story is pretty relatable and things that happen to a lot of freelancers and micro agencies. So it was that day that I decided I needed to figure something else out and really go deeper, become an expert in something specific, and really figure out how to differentiate and express the value of the services I had to offer, because I knew that we knew a lot more than someone who took one web design class, but obviously that wasn't clear to the people we were talking to. So I said, how do I become an expert rather than a generalist? I'm going to share with that story with you today and really talk a lot about my own experience, because that's the experience I have. And I hope that you can take away something from it if you feel like you're a bit too much of a generalist. Let's talk about a few of the problems of being a generalist. First of all, it's hard to explain why you're better than anyone else, like I just talked about. When your website says, we design innovative solutions, and you offer web design and paid advertising and print design and branding and all sorts of everything, it's really hard to explain why you're better at those things than anyone else that your potential clients might be considering. It often ends up that you end up competing on price, since it's not clear what your expertise is. You don't have a deep knowledge in any particular service or any particular market. It becomes that bottom line number that people are comparing as they're looking at your proposal versus someone else's, or your proposal versus their niece who took a web design class in college. Another thing that I found about being a generalist is that I really struggled with content marketing. So I would read all those articles and listen to all those podcasts about how I was supposed to start an email list and blog weekly and do webinars and become a thought leader. But that was really hard when my content I created had to be so general that it applied to jewelers and dentists and brick and mortar and restaurants and all sorts of different businesses. I was bored by the content I was writing, and I was really frustrated because I didn't understand how this email list thing was supposed to work. One of the funniest things that happened was that I decided to do what a lot of people do and put an email newsletter sign up on my website. And it just said, sign up for our marketing tips newsletter. And I couldn't figure out why no one wanted to sign up. I think I ended up with about 2 subscribers to that email list, and one was my husband and one was my mom. So I was really struggling with content marketing, and I really, now looking back, realize it's because it was too general without a really clear value proposition. On that same vein, as a generalist, it's hard to nail down your target customer. So the other thing that I had often heard was create an ideal customer persona and really understand who your target customer is and what's interesting to them, what challenges they have. But again, I was working with such a range of businesses that they didn't have a lot of common problems. So it was hard for me to figure out who the target customer was, when really all I cared about was, did they need help with a website or a project? And were they able to pay me for it? All right, on the execution of the project side, I also found that each project often had a different scope to it. So I spent a lot of free time in discovery for every project and every proposal that I put together. Since every project was different, I had to do a lot of work to figure out what should be included. And lastly, my last problem I had as a generalist was that I had an only average customer knowledge. And by that, I mean the knowledge of the customer I was working with. So what do they need? What do their clients need? What do we need to appeal to them? Every time I started a new project, I had to figure out what that looked like. And that was really hard. So my possible answer that I landed on was to niche down. And you probably saw the phrase niching down in the title of this presentation. In case you're not quite sure what that means, here's my definition. Niching down is becoming a known expert at something really specific and doing less of everything else. Now, I'm not saying doing none of anything else, but getting rid of a lot of those things that dilute your message and make it unclear what you should really be doing and focusing on. I knew that my possible answer was niching down, and I loved the idea of becoming an expert at something and of knowing more about that very specific topic than anyone else, so that it became very clear to anyone who might be considering hiring someone for a specific service that we were the experts that they needed to call. Unfortunately, this didn't just happen naturally. So I really knew that I wanted to pursue niching down, and unfortunately, I didn't really know what that should look like or which service to go after, which industry to go after. I've sometimes heard specialists say, well, I started out just doing general web design and I did this one project and they just referred me to lots of other businesses like them. So it became our expertise. And nothing like that ever happened for me. So instead, in about 2017, I said, I need to figure this out. And just thinking about it isn't working. So I need to do this a little bit more specifically and a little more publicly. Here's what I did. I committed to vlogging about niching down and blogging and making a video every single week until I figured it out. And now it's kind of ridiculous to look at, but I have a YouTube channel with over 60 videos all about exploring possible niches. So I looked at tons of different ideas. I read every book I could about specializing in lead generation. I made all sorts of pro and con lists, any sort of framework I could follow. I looked at favorite past projects. I ranked them in order of preference. I looked at which past projects were most profitable. I bought a course about brand positioning and tried to follow that. I explored lists of industries that might require services to see if any of them sounded interesting. And of course, I asked anyone who would listen to me for 5 minutes what they thought about specializing and what direction they might recommend that I take. And truly, I was very lost and I had no idea. And I really have said before that I felt like I was in the land of the generalist and I wanted to get on the island of the specialist, but I didn't know how to find the boat that actually went there. So I spent a lot of time exploring, and I want anyone who's listening to know that I recognize how hard it is to decide how to niche down and what to focus on. It's a very scary thing to do, to think about taking a very specific type of work and saying no to other work in order to make that possible. So I had a lot of fear around it, and that's why it took me almost 8 months of weekly vlogging to figure out what I might want to do. If you're in a similar boat, let's talk about some examples of specializing and niching down. I read a lot of materials from an expert named Philip Morgan, and he talks all about specializing for technical service firms. And he talks about vertical versus horizontal specialization. So I wanted to bring that up today because if you're considering possibly niching down, here are a couple different routes to take. The first is vertical specialization, and that's where you decide to focus on a specific type of client, a specific industry, and to serve that group of clients in a certain way. So examples of industries that I considered, chiropractors, dentists, mortgage companies, real estate agents, that type of thing. And I found that all of those particular niches were already very well served, but those are examples of vertical specializations, is getting deep within one market and understanding exactly what that market needs, what's going on in their industry, current news and events that affect them, and really going deep to understand a specific type of client. So that's a great type of specialization to pursue. The other type of specializing I considered was horizontal specialization. So this is specializing in a certain platform or service. So some examples there are specializing in membership sites. So a specific outcome. You could become the go-to for membership sites. How about specializing in WooCommerce, really associating yourself with a specific technology so that if someone has a complex WooCommerce project, they know to call you. You could also specialize in reputation management or analytics. So some services that help digital marketing and really become deeply knowledgeable about those things and how to handle them. Or of course, search engine optimization. So as Lindsay mentioned in my bio when we started, I decided eventually to double down and not only specialize vertically, but also horizontally within a certain vertical. Here's what happened for me. I went to a women's business conference and I met a woman named Allie. She was a wedding planner based in Chicago. And as soon as I told her that I worked in digital marketing, because that's what I used to say very generally, she said, "Do you know anything about SEO?" And I said, "Yes, I do." And she said, "Great, I'm having this huge problem with my SEO. I had a website redesigned. I paid a bunch of money about 6 months ago. And as soon as it launched, my search engine rankings absolutely tanked. And I'm not getting the leads that I used to or the traffic. Can you take a look at it and help me figure out what happened?" And that sounded super fun to me. So I said, absolutely. And we started in on a project together to figure out what had happened to her SEO. I did a lot of technical fixes to the website and helped her determine what her plan forward should be. And we had such a great time. It took about 6 months, but we did restore her first page ranking in Chicago. So I had such a good time on this project that it was kind of one of those light bulb moments, like all the stars aligned, the angels sang, and I said, I really want to do more work like this. And I asked Allie if anyone else she knew could use SEO help. And thankfully, she was pretty well connected within the industry, and she started really referring me around. And it was after working on just this one project that I said, I am going to really actively pursue search engine optimization for the wedding industry. And that's what I did. So let me show you something. This is my separate website that I decided to launch. I didn't know what to call it, so I just used my name, Sara Dunn, SEO. I created a whole new brand around SEO for the wedding industry. There were 2 reasons for this. First of all, I wanted the site to be very specific, very clear to the person who landed here, what service I offered and who I offered it to. I also wanted to hedge my risk a little bit. So instead of taking over my old brand and my agency website and saying, okay, now 11web does SEO for the wedding industry, I left my 11web.com website as a general site that still said everything about branding and web design and 12,000 other services. And I left that as my fallback while creating this site that was very, very specific. I love this example of what you see on your screen right here because it's so much more tailored than what I used to be able to do to draw clients in. So this is a blog post that's all about using categories and tags on a wedding specific blog. And the opt-in on the right side is all about SEO basics specifically for the wedding industry. So someone who lands here understands if they're in the wedding industry, and by that I mean wedding planner, wedding photographer, wedding florist, or venue, they know that the tips that I'm going to offer do apply to their business. And they're written in a way that is approachable for them, that they can understand. And there's not a bunch of general stuff that they need to navigate around to get to the information that applies to them. This is really fun for me to also write and complete because I can actually imagine who this person is that I'm writing for. I actually think about a friend of mine who's a wedding photographer, and I ask myself if she could understand the way I'm explaining things. And I really keep her in mind as I'm writing. So it's been so much easier for me to create content in this more specific way. It's more fun for me. And I love having the ability to create content that I know is going to be a lot more helpful. I also found the more projects within this niche that I was doing, I felt like I was deepening knowledge that I would use again. So every time I worked with a wedding planner, I knew if I worked with another wedding planner, I would know more about what works, how they should structure their websites, different listing sites we should use, and just different techniques that have worked in the past. Fast forward to today, and it's a year and a half later. I've worked with almost 40 wedding businesses, and I'm launching my first group program that starts next week. So this has really been something that I have really enjoyed and that has done a lot of good things for me. Let's do a quick summary of some things that happen or that I have found happen when you niche down. So, as I mentioned, a clear understanding of my target market and ideal client. I know my target client is usually a woman running a solo or small team business. She's generally creative and family oriented, and her challenges tend to be time management, being overwhelmed, expectations being that she does all of her own client work and all of her own marketing. And I can write in a way that appeals to someone like that. I also know where and how to market. So I know that this client is probably spending most of her time on LinkedIn, or I'm sorry, on Instagram and not on LinkedIn. So I can make sure that I'm active on my Instagram account, and I can kind of say, you know what, I'm not going to bother with LinkedIn because I know my clients aren't there. I also know what conferences to go to and what blogs to guest post on. I know which podcasts I can submit to be a guest on to connect with this audience, where I might get on a wedding specific podcast and know that every single person who listens is a possible client for me. Something I wasn't expecting, but that I've found, is that it's also a lot easier to receive a referral to the right clients. So when I say to a friend, I work with people in the wedding industry, like planners and photographers, almost everyone can say to me, oh, well, I have this friend, Julie. She's a wedding photographer, and I'd be happy to introduce you, which is really cool. And it's a lot more specific, getting to the right clients as opposed to just anyone like I used to have. Easier productizing of services is something that's been exciting for me. I have cut down proposal time to a huge degree because I am no longer writing custom proposals for every project. I've got a couple levels of service, and generally my clients just choose one or the other, which also means that sales are easier. Delegation is also easier because I'm running through the same processes over and over again. So I have a coworker on my team that does a lot of my basic setup now, and we tend to run through these projects over and over. And lastly, as I mentioned, I myself am expanding into some more education and some other types of revenue, doing a group program next week, and possibly looking at ideas for digital products as well, which is really exciting because I want people to think, if they want to DIY their own SEO and they're in the wedding industry, I want them to know I'm a great resource for them. The topic of this webinar was driving customers to you instead of to them. So I just wanted to touch on briefly some differences where clients come from when you're a generalist versus a specialist. And as a generalist, I think that you and I probably both find that a lot of clients come from local networking, personal connections, and referrals. As a specialist, I have found that a lot more of my clients are coming from content-related work. The SEO on my own site, appealing to SEO for wedding planners or photographers, doing webinars within my industry and speaking and going to conferences. It is an entirely different world finding clients in a specialized way as opposed to in a general way where you're doing a lot of networking and a lot of business card handing out, which is personally not my favorite. To wrap it up, the more conversations that I have with people about niching down, the more I hear people asking, do I have to niche down? And do you think niching down is for everyone? So I don't want to just have a big niching down sales pitch today. I just want to say niching down has worked for me because being a generalist made me feel stuck and it made me feel frustrated. But not everyone feels that way about having a business that serves a broad range of clients with a broad range of services. So if you're happy with your clients, you're happy with your pricing, and you're happy with the amount of work that you get, then being a generalist might work for you. If these things don't necessarily apply to you as well, then niching down and becoming a specialist might be the way that you could reach that $1 million milestone. So to wrap it up, I know niching down can be scary, but I think you'll know if it's a worthwhile idea for you that really resonates for you. And you're probably hearing a lot of different ideas today on this summit. Pay attention to the things that really grab your attention, that make you excited. That's how I felt about niching down. And I think that's why it's worked for me, because the idea of being an expert really resonated. If you think this sounds cool and you want to talk to somebody about it, shoot me a message on Twitter or through my contact form on my website, and I'd be happy to chat with you. That's all I've got for today.